Okay, so chapter 13, the old regime. So this is during that time where you had a lot of kings and queens and things like that. Also going to look at absolutism. That's a type of uh, rule that the kings did at that time where they were in complete control. And then we're going to get to enlightenment later on in the chapter. So the essential questions, okay, or short answers are going to be: what effect did the commercial revolution have on people's standard of living? So how did it change their standard of living? How did Europe's rulers achieve absolute power? How did they gain that power? How did scientific revolution change people's view of the natural world? And last one, how modern was the Enlightenment? And that's a picture from the Enlightenment right there. And this is just kind of going back to, the areas that are kind of taken over by your European, the motherland. All right, so the mother country, France, Spain, and England, you can see all the difference. So England's owning everything in the blue, France, the Louisiana Territory, everything in brown, and then Spain, everything in orange. And this is going to get to mercantilism, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. So the commercial revolution. All right, so really commercial, just think of buying and selling things. And this is going to be a buying and selling revolution that happens in Europe for the first time. So although most of Europe remained agricultural during this period, in other words, they were still mainly farmers, the fastest growing part of European economy was in trade of goods, especially those manufactured in Europe and then brought to Asia and the Americas. So they took raw material from the Americas and from Asia, brought it to Europe, turned it into finished products, which is more expensive, and then shipped it back out to the rest of the world. So the commercial revolution marked an important step in the transition of Europe from local economies in the Middle Ages, where you just produce there at the manor, at the farm, near the castle, to the formation of truly global economy. So this is, you trade everywhere after the commercial revolution. So the commercial revolution had the following aspects. It had global trade, it had mercantilism, and then you're going to bring about the emergence of free enterprise. So here's a good example of what mercantilism actually is. So you got the mother country in this, it's pretty much England. You're getting gold and silver, you're getting food stuff, so all the different types of food, turkey, all the things were brought in from the Americas, and then raw materials like cotton, things like that from the colonies. And all this is to serve the mother country. It's not really for the colonies, it's to make the mother country wealthier. Again, there's all the different trade that's going on, a lot of Atlantic trade from Europe going into the Caribbean and into the Americas. So global trade, people began producing more goods for sale rather than their own use. So before this, what you had was people would make something and just their family would use it. During the commercial revolution, you actually had people produce and actually produce even more than what they needed. That way they could start to sell what we're used to. So trade increased as sugar, rice, tobacco, and precious metals were shipped from the Americas to Europe. Ming China still exported the silks and porcelain, okay, so for plates and for teacups and things like that, while India exported tea. So those are the things being exchanged. The East Indies produced spices. East Indies is India, okay, and Africa produced enslaved workers. So that's the kind of the triangular trade. Europe exported cloth. So they took the cotton from the different places, like from India, from the southern United States, and they turned it into actual clothes. They exported lumber and they exported finished goods. So everything that was actually finished, made into something that you could actually use, that's a finished good. And there's a great picture of all the different trade that was going on at that time, all the different trade routes. So the British in orange, the French in yellow, the Dutch in it's that off. Actually, the Dutch, they kind of make both those look the same, but this would be all the Spanish down the west coast of the Americas. All right, so mercantilism. What they believed is the more wealth you had, the more power you had. So European kings hoped to increase their power through a system of mercantilism. Mercantilists acted to remove trade barriers within their own country. At that time, you had actual trade barriers between cities inside your own country and different regions of your own country, which we don't have in the United States. They also thought that wealth and power were based on amassing as much gold and silver as they possibly could get, and that way you could use that to pay soldiers to defend your country. So bring in as much gold and silver as you can, use that gold and silver to pay your soldiers, and then you would be an extremely powerful country. So mercantilists thought the total wealth of the world was limited. So there was only a certain amount of resources, and that was going to be it. So you had to go out and get them as fast as you possibly could. So that had to be gained through war or through trade. So you had to invade other countries, take their resources, or you had to trade with other countries and get their resources. For this purpose, France, England, and Holland established overseas colonies to get these resources to copy what Spain was doing. Each European mother country exported finished goods back to the colonists in exchange for really, really cheap raw materials from the colonists. So the colonists are always going to be in bad shape economically because they're buying something that's more expensive than what they're actually exporting to the mother country. And this was supposed to lead all this flow of money back to the mother country. So the competition for colonial empires led to a series of wars between the major European powers. So they're fighting over the colonies and they go to war against each other. In the 1600s, England attacked Holland to take over the major shipping routes. In the 1700s, England and France fought a series of wars on land and at sea to control North America and India. So here is a good example of mercantilism. So here's the mother country trying to collect as much gold and silver as possible. So what they wanted to do is export as much as they possibly can. Okay, so they had a balance of favorable trade. So the more you exported, the more money that you made. The less that you had to import, or the cheaper stuff that you had to import, the better off you were going to be. Okay, so what they had was gold, silver, fur, lumber is sent to the mother country. The mother country is going to turn that stuff into a finished good, so manufactured good, and then that's sent to the colonies. So the colonies are spending more than what they're sending out, what they're exporting. And mercantilism, founding of the colonies, new goods in Europe led to significant changes. In the 1500s, Europeans developed a new economic policy called mercantilism. Nations' strength depended on its wealth, and wealthy nations had power for military and expanded influence. So the more gold, the bigger army. It led to intense competition. So wealth measured by the amount of gold and silver possessed by a country. Mercantilists believed that there was a fixed amount of wealth in the world. So you're never going to find a new resource, which we still find today. Okay, so for one nation to become wealthier and more powerful, it had to take wealth, power away from another country. Mercantilists led to intense competition between countries. And this was one of the Navigation Act that was enforced by mercantilism. So if you look over here in the colonies, so this would be the 13 colonies over here, you can't export any hats, woolen, or iron since these things are made in England. So if the U.S. made these things that England was selling, it would be bad for England. So they didn't allow them to make those finished products. You can't export anything except for in English colonial ships. So the raw materials that you could export had to only go in English ships. Okay, it couldn't go in anybody else's ships. So here's something else over here. Take that cargo to England to be taxed before it goes to the colonies. So this is actually a flag of Lebanon. But so if I'm leaving, I'm sorry, this is the British over here. So this is a ship with a Lebanon flag on it. So what they're saying is you couldn't just leave Africa, go to the United States and make money. You had to go to England first, actually pay taxes, and then you could go to the colonies. And then another one here, send that tobacco to England. So send the raw materials to England. All right, the emergence of free enterprise. So merchants and bankers laid the foundation for free enterprise. So they're the ones who really start free enterprise. Merchants, people who sell things, and bankers, people who invest in things. And this, of course, is called capitalism. Under the system, business owners risk their capital. So in capitalism, you risk your capital, you risk your money in a business in order to make profit. The only reason why you're risking your money is to make profit. So the growth of new businesses were weaving cloth, processing food stuff, forging ironwares, making things into steel, iron, things like that. Building ships. This led to a demand for huge sums of money. So if you're going to make these manufacturing areas, you need a ton of money to do that to begin with. So money was needed to pay for facilities. That's what I'm talking about. and materials to use in manufacturing and international trade. So the only way you can make a bunch of money is to make a bunch of stuff, and the only way you can make a bunch of stuff is to build these facilities, and you needed money for that. So ships had to be insured because there was a high risk of loss and accident, very, very dangerous trip across the Atlantic. So stormy weather or war, people would actually sink your ships, and European rulers needed money to buy equipment to hire their troops to wage war. So money became very important. And this is a pyramid of someone who actually probably is not a big fan of capitalism. So super rich at the top, the middle class, which is kind of falling farther and farther behind, and then the poor down at the bottom. So to raise these large sums of money that they needed, the first joint stock companies were formed. Okay, so like our stock market today, but this is a very simple form of it. So these ventures were privately owned businesses that sold stock to investors. Investors bought the stock for a share of profit. The accumulation of capital by these companies allowed them to purchase large amounts of raw materials or equipment such as ships. So what you really did, you're just kind of gambling on a company. You would buy stock in that company, and then you would hope that that company would make so much money that your stock would go up and you would make money off of that stock. So really, if you got into Amazon and you bought Amazon at $1, stock for $1, and Amazon just goes through the roof, makes tons, millions and billions of dollars, that $1 turns into, might even turn you into a millionaire. Okay, so it's kind of how it works in a simple process. So banks also developed new ways of raising and lending money. So banks came up with ways to raise money, and you start to get into interest and all those other stuff, but they would lend money expecting you to pay them back more. So that's what a bank does. So some governments issued funds that were sold to the public. So even governments started to do this, to do kind of what's like a stock. And the government then paid them interest to the purchaser of these funds, what ends up being a bond. So this is actually the first stock right here. So what you're doing is you're really kind of gambling on a company. And one of the first companies was the East India Company. So they were going to the United States, getting a lot of raw materials, bringing back to England and trying to make a bunch of money. And then the rise of capitalism. Increasing trade between Europe and the colonies created new businesses and trade practices during the 1500s and 1600s. These practices would have a great impact on the economies of European nations. So capitalism actually starts. In capitalism, most economic activity carried on by private individuals, not the king, not the government, and it's organized in order to make a profit. So capitalism is for a profit. So during this time, capitalism expanded. Overseas trade, individuals amassed great trade fortunes. So the shipping became very, very important. Merchants supplied colonists with European goods, the finished goods, and in return, the colonists gave them raw materials. So increased business activity, overseas trade made many merchants rich. This wealth enabled them to invest and actually buy more businesses, and business activity in Europe increased greatly. So the financial revolution enabled some governments to raise large sums of money to expand their armies and navies. Bankers and merchants became more influential in government. And even in places like Holland, rich merchants were able to establish what's called an oligarchy. That's when the wealthy run the country. So wealthy families, wealthiest ones, are going to run the country. As a result of the commercial revolution, Europeans had many more products from which to choose. They could enjoy tea, sugar, coffee, cotton, and other goods for the first time ever. So there were more books and new forms of learning and entertainment, such as theater groups. Okay, so this is like during the time of Shakespeare. There's newspapers and there's schools. So people actually have money to spend on these different things for the first time. This led to more choices in occupants in jobs, as well as consumption. So people just started buying things. These advances led to the rising of standard of living for many Europeans. So there's your short answer. So all this stuff led to people having more things, which is your standard of living.